Welcome back to the Acceptable Chess Weekly Roundup, where we take some time to look back and celebrate our successes, lament our mistakes, and most importantly, learn how to do it better next week. I am your host, John Harden, here with my dear friend and National Master Andrew Hoy. And Andrew, as we kick off this tournament that I have come to creatively refer to as the Winter Tournament, I've noticed that there are two sections this time around. What is going on? Please, God, help me navigate this enormous field of competitors.
So this is awesome. We actually have 51 players playing this time around. So we have two
Woo!
sections. We have an open section, open to anybody, and the section is rated with the USCF online ratings. And we also have an under 1900 section. So that is restricted to players that are under 1900 USCF, and it is unrated with the USCF. So you don't need a USCF membership if you want to play in that section. So, after the first round, which took place this past Thursday, we have fully half the field with one full point leading the tournament, so it's a big logjam at the top. And there were really not many upsets in the first round, so it was mostly the higher rated players taking care of business. Some of us, myself included, got incredibly lucky and barely managed to win, and others played extremely clean games, so I think we'll be taking a look at some of those as well.
Yeah, taking care of business definitely had a different meaning depending on which game you were looking at.
Yes, definitely. And if we
Wonderful.
quickly take a look at the under 1900 section, you'll see that we have something similar. It was a lot of players who won their games very cleanly, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next couple of rounds as players start to play more challenging games, and we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah, I think, want to just add here that I'm very interested to see how our competitors from the last two acceptable chess events fare in this new field, as I think it's gotten significantly tougher, even in the under 1900 section.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of very serious players in both sections, and it should be some very exciting games, some close games, and hopefully some good learning experiences.
Quite right, quite right. Well, without any further ado, I think let's get on into it. So the first game that we wanted to highlight was this one here between Rufus and Tony. And because of the size of the field, we are going to be greatly curtailing the amount of each game that we look through. Some games will get a little bit longer treatment, but for this game, we felt that really it boiled down to this moment here that ended up being very critical. Tony plays a very sensible move at this moment, knight to g4, offering to helpfully trade off Rufus' critical protector of the dark squares, the dark squared bishop. Because of the way the pawn structure is, this is a pretty valuable piece in this position. And I think probably it makes sense for Rufus to try to preserve it. Instead, he makes another, I think, very logical decision, which is to try to use the opportunity of black taking to create some tactical tricks and plays knight to g5. But after allowing black to take, probably white would be okay if he simply took back here and allowed the trade. And then he's got his knight in a decent position. Maybe I can play bishop h3, make something happen, right? It's a game. Probably I still think black is doing well. But unfortunately, he failed to consider, after trading rooks, trying to gain control of the file. Black has the unfortunate bishop takes f8, which now makes this knight completely untouchable. If he takes queen takes e3, he is met by the sickening bishop c5, which pins and wins, as the rhyme goes. Rufus definitely did spot it now and did his best to play around it, but unfortunately the loss of material was just too much, and black was able to pretty quickly rise to a commanding advantage, which he was able to convert. So well done by Tony, absolutely. But we thought that was sort of the critical moment there.
Yeah, and let's take a look at another critical moment in a different game that was a lot more subtle than that one. So Mike started out his game by playing the King's Indian with white, and he has fianchettoed his bishop on g2, which is a pretty typical idea in the King's Indian. The idea is to really slow down black's kingside counterplay by trying to defend the king's side. Now, if we look at the next couple moves, I think white's already winning. White can play some move like a3, keeping the knight out of b4, and white really has no problems. Black really can't expand on the king side, and I would say that white has all of the chances. Something like knight h4 to control f5, maybe eventually play for g4, and very slowly white can take control of the game.
Yeah,
Uh,
those of you who have watched the Blitz games that Andrew and I have played in the King's Indian, I have to say, we're getting none of the kind of vicious counterattacking chances that I associate with this opening.
yeah, and it takes some collaboration from white in order to get some of those crazy lines as well. And here with the bishop on g2, you're really not going to checkmate white, so instead you have to look for other things. In this position, I think black's real plan is to play c6, trying to attack d5. Of course, I've drawn this nice arrow because that hangs d6, so I think that it would be more prudent to start with either rook d7 or rook d8, defending d6, and only then going for this c6 plan.
Andrew, these arrows are beautiful. Did you have help?
I did. I took all the time in the world to set it up before the show started. So
Fabulous.
if we look back at the game, Mike did in fact play a3, a very nice move. And after f5, he played this knight h4 move that I had mentioned, but he's ignoring the threat of f4, saying that regardless of what happens, this g6 pawn is too strong, and the knight on g6 would be winning material even if f4 comes. So black saw that and played queen f6, and now Mike had a very nice motif to finish the game. He took on f5. Of course, black cannot take back, trade queens, and be completely losing in an endgame. So black played g5, and now Mike hit him with knight g6. So despite the fact that the knight is kind of overextended and abandoned on g6, white is essentially saying this knight controls all of the key squares, and it doesn't matter if my knight is a little bit frail up there on g6. It's just a very, very safe piece and a very, very strong piece.
It's really remarkable to look at the state of all of Black's minor pieces that would love to come over and trade away that night, and just how difficult it is for them to make the journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
and after rook f7, Mike played g4, and he went on to win a very nice game. After g4, the knight cannot be removed, and the game is essentially won for white.
yeah, yeah. We thought that this move was a really excellent example of positional play, and frankly, a good show of bravery by Mike, because I would have been a little bit leery of moving the knight into g6 here, worried that I was missing some kind of key tactic and letting it get snapped off. For those reasons, we have awarded knight g6 with our coveted move of the week. Congratulations, Mike. Carrying on forward, we had this game between, oh boy. Some of you I'm meeting for the first time, and if I pronounce your names wrong, please forgive me. But Nikolai versus Felix in this effort with an e4, e5 structure. And we thought the best thing to highlight out of the beginning of this game was actually the quite important to know center fork trick. In the two knights defense, which Felix has offered here, the two main moves for white are either knight to g5, going in for sort of fried liver attack kind of ideas, or simply d3, playing in something like a quiet game. These are both very solid moves. They both have plenty of merits. But a common, all too common mistake is to play knight to c3, defending the pawn with a piece instead. This allows black a very clever positional tactic, which Felix takes advantage of. Black can play knight takes e4. Knight takes e4 is then met with d5. Although this does not win any material for black, it does, at minimum, eliminate white's center pawn, which is very good. The best line for white usually is to play bishop d3, preserving the light-squared bishop. And now black can at least be happy that he's eliminated a pawn in the center, and usually plays for ideas of bishop d6, castles, right, and sometimes a quick f5. However, even just as common as the center fork trick itself is this move, which gives away the bishop pair and I think makes black's advantage still a little better. So something to watch out for if you play these systems as white or black, right? Make sure you are looking out for this opportunity, because I find it is all too common. I actually myself have had it against a 2000 rated player over the board. So I know that it is out there. Be watchful. This led to a nice position for black, and then a little bit later on, Felix finds a really pretty tactic in this position to win himself quite a bit of material, in fact, an entire rook. He sees that exchanging, there is a nasty pin on the d file, and he can just go ahead and snap that thing right off. So well done to Felix. He was able to convert very smoothly after that. I look forward to seeing what he does next round.
Yeah, and
This
that
was a tournament with a lot of victories for Black, Andrew.
yeah. So before we move on to our next game, that does put Felix into the lead in the event. Felix is our top seed in the under 1900 section, so we'll definitely be keeping up with his games and seeing how he does going forward. Also, Nick, thank you so much for the gift subs. They scared the crap out of me, so I just want to share that. I'm going to have to work on the audio levels of the alert sounds.
No. Keep it turned up, and Nick, keep giving them out.
Yeah, and Nick, if you're going to be generous, we won't poke as much fun at your game when we get there. So,
Yes.
moving on, we had a very nice game between Charlie and Eric. Now, Eric and Tony are some of the top juniors in Massachusetts, so we certainly have our work cut out for us when we play them in games. And here, Eric is actually down in exchange, so he's really scrambling to hold a draw. This is kind of a key moment. Charlie has the extra exchange, he has a pawn on d5, but at the same time, Black does have a little bit of counterplay with this check. I think John pointed out that the easiest move would be bishop f3. By blocking all of the checks, we don't have to worry about knight e4 or knight d3 just yet, and it's a nice way to solidify, take a step back, defend a little bit, and then we can figure out how we want to go forward. Maybe White's going to sacrifice an exchange back on d7 in order to win yet another pawn. Maybe White will try and infiltrate onto the 6th rank by maneuvering this rook around. The point is that White doesn't have to rush. White can take his time and very slowly try and build up his advantage. Instead, after king e3, I think that the game is very close to equal already. And ironically, Black is able to shuffle the rook back and forth, maintaining this pin on the bishop, and it's incredibly difficult for White to untangle. As the next couple moves show, Black can keep checking, and White could obviously make a draw. If he wants to go back, he can simply repeat for all eternity, but White is up an exchange and a pawn. He's really trying for more than making a draw in this position. Now, unfortunately, king h2 kind of throws away the game. King h2 allows this really nice shot from Black. These young kids who are 2000 are incredibly tactically alert, and Black finds this very nice pin along the 4th rank, and Black is actually better now because he's going to win back this piece on e4. Charlie tried to bail out by taking a bishop off and taking this pawn, but unfortunately Eric is accurate up until the end. He takes on h4, takes on e4, and now it's Black who's up a piece. And even though White has some drawing chances, Black was able to convert this.
Yeah. For a demonstration of what those drawing chances might look like, just look at Andrew Hoy's game, in which he himself was also down a piece and somehow managed to come away. Moving right along, we had this excellent effort between. Oh boy, I have lost the names here. Andrew, help me out.
You're putting me on the spot there, John.
Yep, I agree. I'm putting us all on the spot. Oh dear. I have screen names and I'm just meeting these people for the first time.
Okay, so this was between Kartavaya. I'm so sorry for that pronunciation. That was awesome. And Oscar is Black.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to guess Kartavia and Oscar because it's slightly easier for me to say at this moment. In any case, this game featured a Scandinavian. And actually, is it called the Portuguese Gambit when Black plays knight f6, or is that
it can lead into it? It's only the Portuguese Gambit if White tries to hold on to a pawn by taking on c6.
Got it. Thank you.
So we actually kind of transpose back to a Caro-Kann type structure where Black has traded the d pawn for White's e pawn. Actually, one of my favorite ways to play this is to directly transpose into a Panov-Botvinnik attack by playing the normal c4, knight f3, knight c3, and just going into some other line that I happen to know well.
That's great. Yeah, I'll have to remember that. I'm sure that can be very useful, as I would bet that you're more familiar with that than a lot of these Scandinavian players.
Yeah. So we actually get to a critical moment right on move 6. Black is almost losing by force if b7 goes. So here, Black has to find the most aggressive move, knight c6 in the position. The idea is that we're going to pitch the b7 pawn, but in exchange we get some very quick development. Knight c2 would be a very amusing checkmate, not just a check and winning the rook, but the king actually doesn't have any squares. And this is kind of a key moment already for white. White has to find a way to fight back, and I would say that after knight c6, white can't even take on b7. However, in the game, black played queen c8, a more passive way to continue. And after just a few more moves, we can actually compare the development of both sides. c6 is almost certainly necessary to blunt this bishop, but it doesn't do anything to contribute to the development of the black pieces. And here we see that white has developed every single piece, and on the flip side, I would say that black really only has these three pieces developed, and that's enough for white to have a very large edge already.
Yeah, those rooks are just a very sad state of affairs on a8 and h8. They look like they stayed home today. Yeah, so from this, it's actually very interesting to note. You would perhaps expect white to have rolled, and that is largely what happened for the majority of the game. There were some really wonderful tactical opportunities that happened over on the queen side. Particularly this knight b5 move I liked a lot. It does not actually lead to a decisive material advantage yet, but it rips open the king's cover in a way that proves very effective. The game itself ended up being a game of quite a few stunning reversals, but white did eventually dig out the point and do very well. But this was just one last thing I wanted to highlight. This knight coming to b5, hitting the queen, and eventually a liquidation here where black is forced to give the exchange back that was just given, because otherwise this knight fork is going to decide things. So a lot more of that game, to be sure, but this is, I think, by far the most important moment. Carrying forward. All right. We have this effort between Thomas and Santosh. This was another one with some, no surprise, tactical opportunities involved, where black played e5 and white made this offering of queen b3 check. After this king h8 move, it's understandable why Thomas gave into the temptation of going for knight g5, right? We've all, I think at this point, many of us who study tactics, seen these smothered mate ideas of knight f7 check and possibly picking up at minimum the exchange, because here, even without the smothered mate, we have designs on the queen. Unfortunately, here it does not work. White would probably have been better served by simply developing and taking care of his center. The black pieces are very actively placed to attack the d4 point, and he probably can't afford to go sallying forth just yet. Some very accurate play from black punished this almost immediately. So knight takes d4 is possible, because after knight f7, rook f7, knight f7, black has a choice of either rook takes or even king g8 may be possible.
Well, king g8, that would in fact lead to our smothered mate.
Ah.
We have a nice double check here.
I can't get quite smothered, right? Because I don't have to take with the rook?
That's true, yes.
Yeah, that's fair. But I think you're right that it may... yeah, maybe I'm okay here. Yeah, I don't know. We're definitely probably white is at least a draw here. So maybe this actually would have been a good effort for white to make. But instead, he tries to save his queen, right? Hoping to deliver the lethal blow next turn. And now, unfortunately, knight c2, and things seem to be getting away from him a bit. After knight e6, right, taking the exchange, which black is not worried about picking up the exchange himself in just a moment, right? We have this position where really, although it's not dramatically different in terms of material, black has greatly released all the pressure, has the f-file almost certainly to work with, and I think probably is for choice. Although I suppose maybe I'm overstating things on the f-file.
Yeah, so if I were black here, I'd play c6 to dominate this knight, and then you can think about if you want to go after e3 and f2 or not. But I would say that this is, for all intents and purposes, winning for black with the extra pawn, the better center, and a pretty comfortable game. Even rook f1 is not really a threat. I can simply move my queen out of the way.
Yeah, quite right, quite right. Yeah, I realize it definitely prevents me from seizing the f-file, but I still like very much this idea that you were talking about. Yeah, so very well done by Santosh, and I think an understandable mistake by Thomas. But moving forward to our next game, Andrew, we have some returners who have played now in a couple of acceptable chess events. Who am I discussing here?
Yeah, so this is the game between Nate with white and Frank with black, and it actually started off as an Alyekin defense, and it really doesn't look like that to look at the board at this point. So both sides have kind of played the opening, shifting back towards more normal positions, as opposed to really trying to fight against a knight on b6. So now white switches to the dark squares. I like this move, queen b2, an awful lot. Black develops a rook, and knight e3 is a very strong move, threatening to hop into d5 and threatening to take off this light square bishop, which would really highlight black's poor knight compared to the bishop pair. So here, black sees an opportunity to try and fight back against that with this nice in-between move, knight d3. However, this knight is overextended on d3, and now we see that white has this very, very nice trick. He first takes on d3, and then after bishop takes, which preserves the bishop pair for black, white finds this very nice shot knight d5 with a nice double attack on the queen and the bishop. And unfortunately, black is immediately forced to shed material because this bishop is totally lost. Black does find a way to sack on d5 and try and only give up an exchange, but it's really not enough. After d6, this pawn is far too much. The white rooks flow into the position nicely, and white was able to win, although not without a couple of inaccuracies later on in the game.
Yeah, quite right. Yeah, cutting just to the end of that game, I did think that this
Mm.
final tactic was pretty. Rook to e8 check, unseating the rook temporarily from the protection of the queen and putting it in take to the pawn so that Nate can then respond with queen h8 check, which is going to finish the job here. So that was a nice way to end things. But yeah, well done by Nate, and best of luck to Frank in the next round. Carrying on, we had this game. This is a good example of, I think, how hard chess is and the incredible importance of staying alert even when the game is in your pocket. Edward played an extremely nice game here against Dave. He, I think, was in command of the game throughout most of it and had here a nice commanding end game position. The A pawn is going to be very quick to run up the board if he can just sort of simplify things a little bit. So a black played c3, and I think white, just eager to get on with winning the game, played all too quickly a4. And Dave did not miss his opportunity, seeing that this pawn can simply push through. So I think we included this just as a demonstration of how important it is to keep aware, even when you think the game is won, because little things like this can really ruin a boy's night. Yeah, but congratulations to Dave on pulling out that point. Moving forward.
Yeah, so we have an interesting in between move here. This is an opportunity that you should always be alert for. Right now, black has his bishop attacked, and he could certainly take on c3 and be a little bit worse fighting with the knights against the bishops, but I don't think this is so bad for black either. Black did decide to preserve the bishop by playing bishop a5, and here Dave thought he had an opportunity to win d5, so he took. Seeing that if queen takes, for example, we have this nice move b4, and the queen is attacked by the knight. The knight is actually attacking both the queen and the knight, and the bishop is hanging, so there's just a little bit too much going on, and white will be able to claw his way out of the complications with a reasonable position. However, even worse than that line, which is still probably okay for black, black found the even better knight takes c3, which is a total in-between move, and that cuts off the defense of this bishop on d5, and after white recaptures on c3, black goes up an entire piece. Perhaps white's best chance would have been to try and grab this pawn on f7, and he at least has some compensation for his piece.
Yeah. Yeah, quite
Black
right.
did go on to win. Chris played a very nice game there, and he found a few more tricks throughout the end of the game in order to put it away.
Yeah, Andrew, just one other tactical detail here that I thought was interesting.
Mm.
if he tries bishop takes c6, hoping to get a full piece and thereby stay in the game, black has the unfortunate discovered check. Knight d5 check, I think, is another way to recover his extra material with some advantage. Bishop to d2 obviously would be met simply by trading it off and then consolidating.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah, very good. This game that is between Tim and Lenny features, I think, one of the largest upsets of the first round. Tim, as we know, is an exceptionally strong player. Lenny is returning to us after taking an event off, but I know also works on his game very hard. So this was a very anticipated game, as far as speaking for myself only. And I think Tim had the better end of it for the majority of the game. We decided to begin here in this rather critical position. Tim, with the white pieces, has a very nice advantage. We can see because of the activity of his rooks. Although I think the opening went very well for Lenny, the d5 square is completely under his control, which is something that you are always looking for, especially in a Nimzo Indian, which this game came out of. But after some tactical maneuvering, right, we find ourselves in this position where Tim finds himself able to play a mate in 4, which was unfortunately missed. But I will admit, just for the benefit of the viewers, that I couldn't find it even when Andrew told me it was there. Andrew, what could I not see?
So black played this normal looking move f6, trying to undermine the center. And I know we all love to sacrifice our queens, and this is a very, very nice mate, starting with queen takes h6. And the idea is quite simply that the king cannot escape from the edge of the board, and white plays the very calm move bishop d2, hitting h6, and there's no defense whatsoever to rook takes h6 mate. The best that black can do is throw in one spite check, and then it's mate next move. This is a sequence that's incredibly hard to find, especially in the time pressure that both players were in. So I really can't second guess them for missing this. And this whole game and the rest of this whole game was one of the most interesting finishes that we had, simply because there is extreme time pressure on both sides.
Yeah, quite right, quite right. Yeah, so instead, Tim made the offering of rook to h4, which does pass back very, very briefly the advantage to Lenny. But g5 creates some more weaknesses, and Tim stays in the driver's seat. There were quite a few more reversals as we wind down here, giving away the whole night. Obviously, rather unfortunate. But I think this was the last moment that Tim stayed vastly better in the position. Here, I think probably the best idea is just to keep the rook on, play something like the unlikely rook to h4, the pawn cannot still take because of the pin, and try and maintain as many attackers as possible. We can see that h6 is very close to, or really very close to falling here. Instead, naturally trying to maybe simplify the position a bit in time pressure, Tim took the rook on f8 and gives up the open file, and Lenny was able to capitalize and win a nice game thereafter.
Yeah, so after looking at a lot of these exciting tactical sequences, I want to bring things back to some more positional ideas. So specifically, I want to talk about the d5 square, especially in the Sicilian. So this game is between Alex, who won our last tournament, and Logan, who's another very strong 2000 rated player from the Boston area. And Logan plays the Sveshnikov with black. The Sveshnikov is a double-edged opening. Black plays this e5 move, which immediately puts the question to white's knight. The trade-off is that while we're gaining these tempi against the black knight, against the white knights, we're giving away this d5 square for all eternity. So here, the main line is to continue with knight b5. The idea there is that if black plays a6, we can hop into d6, gaining a tempo. The queen comes to this very nice square, and we're now prepared to play bishop g5, pinning this knight, and knight d5. And in practical terms, white does it extremely well here. So instead of a6, black first plays d6 and only now plays a6 and b5. And although white has this very nice d5 square, gotta love those arrows, this knight over on a3 is really sidelined, so it's about equal, and this was the line that Carlsen chose to play as black in his recent World Championship match. So if we back up a little bit, after e5, Alex played knight b3 instead. This is a sideline. It does have some poison for black, but black can equalize immediately with bishop b4. And now there's no way that this knight is going to get to d5 because next move black is going to take it off the board. Instead,
solves a lot of problems when you do that.
Yeah, exactly. Instead, in the game, black played a6, giving white another opportunity to play this same idea. Of course, white does not blunder with knight d5, which would allow this boomerang tactic that John loves oh so much.
I do. My man knows me.
Yes, definitely. After any sort of move like h6 in the Sveshnikov, we definitely want to take this knight off. Then that's because now we have permanent control of the d5 square. However, white doesn't immediately hop in. First, he slows down this counterplay on the king side that black might otherwise have with bishop g5 and f5 by playing g3 and bishop g2. Now the knight does hop into the center, and I think this is another critical moment. Here, instead of f4, which was played in the game, and after e takes f4, perhaps seeing that black has this very nice move, bishop h4 check, and the king has to go for a walk, perhaps it would have been better to play queen c3 here, getting the queen out of the way, and this is a very important tempo to pick up. Perhaps now white is going to be able to castle queenside and then play the king all the way to b1, and should have some good counterplay based on this d5 square. But again, it's hard to sacrifice pawns, especially when we can recapture them. But now you'll see that this knight really can't control d5. We try to do that to get it back to d5 by playing h4. Here again, I think this is an opportunity for black to take on f4 and exchange the nature of the advantage. Now black's advantage would mostly be due to the airiness of the white king. After bishop f6, a move that I probably would have been quite content playing, I think white makes the final mistake of the game. Instead of playing knight d3, I think this knight just has to go back to d5. Even if we are giving up this pawn over here, I think that that's a reasonable price to pay. I'm happy to play something like rook a2 and then finally play for a4. And we just have to go for these complications with white and try and get something going in the center. After knight d3, the knight hopped into e5, the queen develops, and now we see after knight b4 trying to get back to d5, Logan finds a very nice tactic based on the loose nature of the king and queen, and he finds queen takes d4, winning an entire piece, and with it, the game.
Yeah.
So
well played
that's
by him.
Kind of why the d5 square is so important for both colors in the Sicilian. I want to take another look at this game between Bill and Michael, and here we see that we have the same idea of this d5 square, but it comes about in a little bit of a different way. So this looks like it's starting off as a Sveshnikov. If black played knight f6 and knight c3, we could certainly transpose it directly into a Sveshnikov. Instead, black played g6, and this is the accelerated dragon. The accelerated dragon, the idea is to not play d6. If we play d6 as black, we're going to invite white to play the Yugoslav attack with bishop e3, queen d2, f3, and the idea is to play bishop h6. So instead, even though black doesn't play d6, he's still going to keep an eye on this d-pawn and try and play d5 in one move. After bishop e3, knight f6 happens. This is attacking the e4 pawn as well as supporting the d5 square. White played bishop to d3, trying to defend this pawn. But now, with the queen no longer eyeballing d5 with a little bit of an x-ray attack, we see that after both sides castle, black is now able to play d5. By playing d5 in one move, black has completely gotten rid of his only weakness, which would be this d5 square. We're going to see some trades here. For example, this would be a very nice position for black. We're already threatening to pick up a piece on d4. This knight really has to go backwards. And black can actually grab on b2 because there's no bishop h7 discovery that we have to worry about winning the queen. After d5, white instead tried to play rook e1, and here we have to take on c6 as an in-between move. Otherwise, we're going to be losing a piece on d4 if we're not careful, or we're going to have to really contort ourselves and give up the bishop pair, which is probably just as bad in order to avoid all sorts of terrible things happening. So after knight c6, we do see that even though white has avoided losing material, black has this very nice knight on d5, and I would say that black is already better in this position simply because black is going to have this uncontested dark square monster. All right, so this has been quite a tirade on the d5 square and the d5 break for what happens in the Sicilian. Bear this in mind, keep d5 in mind as both colors. It's always a big idea in the Sicilian, and I think we're ready to get on to some of our feature games at this point.
Oh, are we just gonna skippity doo dah about past this next one,
We
or is
can look at Nick's game. That's one of our feature games.
oh I was going to protect his identity by simply referring to him as N Riccadelli.
I guess we could do that too. So somebody, and we're not going to say who, is playing black in this game,
Right.
and
Right.
it didn't go so well for him. So we actually start off with a normal looking position, kind of, and now white plays this somewhat premature knight g5. It looks like we are getting to f7, but black has this very normal idea of knight h6, defending that pawn. Both sides prepare to castle, and now white plays this very strong f4 move. After f4, white has the very large threat of taking on e5 and attacking f7. So for that reason, I think I would castle here. That adds yet another defender to f7. If we take here, we can potentially take with the knight, which adds another defender to f7, as well as picking up a tempo by attacking this bishop on b3. And after a normal looking move like bishop b3, black can play bishop g4, shutting down these attacks forever. A move like queen e1 is not really a threat. We can get the king out of dodge, and then we're prepared to play f6 and boot the knight. All right, so a little bit of a discussion on why we should castle early in these positions. Instead of castling, white took on f4. I'm sorry, black took on f4, and now white went for this very interesting piece sacrifice, bishop takes f7. After knight e6, I might have preferred to take on f7. You have a pawn for the piece, some very strong discoveries, and if the king comes to g8, I think that this is kind of a reasonable compensation for white. I still think black is better and doing quite well here, but there is some compensation for white for the piece.
Yeah, the fact that
Instead,
rook on
white
h8
tried
is
knight
trapped.
e6, and I think this knight e6 move is very, very strong, and now white has too many threats for black to meet. Black held on to the entire bishop, definitely the right move, and now after knight c7, I think this is the last chance for black. Black really has to play king d8, covering the c7 square so that the knight is in fact trapped on a8. We'll be able to play b6 and bishop b7, picking up this knight and having some nice pressure on the light squares. After king f8, which was played instead, we have a few more moves. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I don't think there's anything terribly noteworthy about this. There is one more moment that I want to call out, and that is right here. In this position, we notice that the knight is still offsides on a8, and white is trying to put some pressure on the f file. For that reason, I think white should play f5. This is the most direct way to open up the f file. We really can't take. There's too many weaknesses now. We can start to think about grabbing that f5 pawn. We don't even have to grab it. We can maneuver this knight around to a good square. We're going to be able to play moves like queen g5 and sack an exchange on f5. And if black does anything other than take this knight on 8, white is going to be able to retrieve his knight by playing knight c7 and be up an exchange for no compensation at all. So instead of f5 in the game, we actually had e5. After e5, I really like the move that Nick played, knight f5. This puts the knight on this perfect square. It shuts down the f-file, comes with a tempo, and now after queen f2, this is Nick's big chance. If he grabs the knight on a8, even though the queen is on a terrible square, I think that black is once again better, and that's because black is going to be able to take on e5, move the king out of the way, and then activate the rook. And at some moment, black will be able to play b6 and have some very nice light square pressure as well. So again, a very key moment, and unfortunately in the game, Nick didn't take the knight right away. Instead, he took on e5, and now white immediately punishes that move by playing queen c5 check, taking advantage of the square that was just vacated. And after the queen trade, white very calmly removes his knight from a8 and ends up with an exchange to the good. So a very interesting game. Nick, a little bit of a tough break. I think you played very well with that one exception. And that actually brings us to our feature game. John, do you want to introduce the players?
Yeah, so we had here in our feature match Sean versus Vinamra, and I think that Andrew asked me to introduce them because he's not sure if we pronounced that right. But hopefully we did, and thank you very much for playing. So this game featured an advanced Caro-Kann. So this is when white pushes the pawn forward to e5, seizing space, and this often leads to some of the sharpest and most wild lines, I think, in the Caro. It's pretty theoretical, and both players have a wing to attack on, right? Black is often playing for this c5 move and trying to counterattack on the queen side. White, in quite a few games, can just roll with his pawns. Sometimes all of these pawns even get pushed, and tries to simply crush black like a bug. So we'll see which one happened in this particular game. So far, the opening was played, I think, very accurately by both sides through the beginning. We see, again, like I talked about, right? G4, weird move, but not in this line, right? Very typical, restricts this light squared bishop and can even threaten to win it. After something like h4, you see it's vital for black to play h5 so that he doesn't just immediately lose a piece to this pawn roller. We have a few more moves, and we reach a fairly reasonable position. Things start to go badly for black right around here. So knight to f5, bishop d3. Again, the game is still fairly balanced. I think black's not yet been able to begin his counterplay. He very much wants to get in c5 and start things going over here. Something like queen to b6 makes a lot of sense, restricting the development of this dark squared bishop and supporting these breaks that I was discussing. But understandably, I think black was worried about giving up this e-pawn right after takes and takes. So he played knight to h6. This seems reasonable enough, but it does put the knight on kind of a weird square, and allows white to surprisingly make an exchange and end some of his immediate problems. It's funny, I want to note here, making this exchange to me seems like a violation of principles that I know, right? We're helping black develop his pieces, and we're trading a knight that admittedly was not very well placed for our bishop, which at least has not yet done anything, but we know that the bishop pair is valuable. But Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the main thing to learn from such an exchange and why it's so good is that in these opposite wing attack positions, white needs time more than anything else. And by being able to take here and forcing black to take back, he can castle, right, and already be well on his way to this f4, f5 idea. Does that ring true to you? I know you play the Caro and are much more expert in these positions.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summary. The other thing that I think it's a more complicated question than a one-word answer, but one of the key ideas for white is that after black plays c5, we would really love to be able to get this knight to d6. And in order to prevent that, black has to do something like a6 or queen b6 at a moment when we're going to be able to hit b2. So in this concrete case, by playing knight h6, we give white the extra tempo to castle because we're getting the bishop out of the way. So now queen b6, I'll just put queen b6 on the board. This really is not fast enough because white will now have the time to castle, and anything like c5 is going to run into knight b5 now. Again, I'm just leaving this bishop. I realize this is not at all how the game would go, but those are kind of the key ideas, and that's why everything becomes so important to play promptly. And this one tempo that white is able to gain by playing bishop takes h6 in one move is so critical.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's very interesting. I also am noting, just in light of what you said, that this knight on f5 might have been a
Mm-hmm.
potential defender of that square as well, which is another reason to let white be the one to take the time to take it off, rather than sort of inviting it by moving over here. Okay, so in any case, the game starts to very quickly get out of hand. We see that c5 has been a little bit slowed up. Black does know his pawn structures and does play it now, but things are already a little bit too slow. For illustration of why, I guess let's just look at the game, right? C takes d4 makes a lot of sense and is threatening to win a piece, but white simply says, my pawn capture is better. If black now tries to take on c3, we take with check, which I think is rather critical, because it interrupts any opportunity for black to do the same. Quite obviously, queen d7 is the only move. I don't think we have any interest in seeing what happens after something like this. So queen d7 will exchange the queens off, and then the final blow, once again coming with check, is bishop f5, netting another exchange, and certainly I think enough to win the game. Rook e6 is just swapping one rook for another, doesn't do anything materially. Notice also that the d pawn is hanging
Mm-hmm.
to boot. In light of this, black decided to take on e6, quite rightly, but now again this d pawn hangs, the knight gets himself out of hock, and black's counterplay is coming too slowly. This move did not win move of the week, but Andrew and I both in our discussions earlier said that we really liked what follows next because it actually looks fairly simple, but I think does a tremendous amount to improve white's position over and above where it already is. White now played rook h to e1. It's nice to see a creative way of defending the knight, right? Rather than moving this knight off his excellent post on d5 or needing to exchange pieces in some way, white simply pins the rook. And by doing, pretty well guarantees that he's going to be able to gain control of the e-file at some point, because of course this knight staying here means it's pretty difficult for black to get a good piece onto that file and fight back. So bishop e7 makes a lot of sense, at least trying to get the king out of the way. But now queen takes d4, the rook is hit again, and things pretty quickly begin to unravel. This final combination here, just fast forwarding slightly, queen b4 check, the king moves, and now once again, for the something time this evening, we see a knight fork bringing home the bacon, picking up the exchange. Obviously, black goes away, not wanting to be met with a discovery. And after queen takes c8, queen e7 was more than good enough. These pawns are all falling. We have back rank threats if black ever tries to activate his queen, and things are just not looking good. The game finished after queen g8, queen takes b7 instead, going after these pawns, knight takes h5, and then the very nice little tactical detail. Andrew and I have talked many times before about how often these tactics in these winning positions are not what win you the game per se, because you already have a winning position, but they get you the resignation. And that's a really important moment too, because as long as you are still playing, as we've all experienced, that possibility of mistakes still exists. So that is sort of a way of thinking about the end of the game that maybe will help motivate you if you feel your focus flagging, because you know you're winning and what could he possibly do anyway, right? Try to find those really accurate moves that force your opponent to finally give up the ghost. And here, white does with queen b5. We notice that there are two pieces hanging here, and efforts to defend them, such as f6, get met with the very unfortunate rook to e8, pinning and winning. So that was a really nice detail, and I think after some moments thinking, Black did finally yield the point. So well done to Sean, and really well done by everyone. I thought these were some really interesting games, a lot of drama, particularly in Andrew's game, but lots of places elsewhere too. I'm really excited to be back. I love these tournaments and hanging out with this community. And yeah, I'm really excited about round two.
Yeah,
Andrew,
so
what? Yes, go
a
ahead.
couple of things that we want to discuss quickly. I just put a link to the pairings in the chat, and we have a new command, pairings, so that you guys can find the pairings at your leisure. We will be keeping the pairings and the wall chart up to date, complete with your opponent's Lichess username, so do all the preparation that you want. And the games, by default, will take place on Thursday nights at 6:30 p.m. If for whatever reason you're busy on a Thursday night at 6:30 p.m., please feel free to contact your opponent. I'd recommend using Lichess for that, but if you need to get in touch with somebody more quickly or more directly, feel free to email the boylstonchess at gmail email accounts, and Nick will help you reschedule your game to a more convenient time. You're welcome to reschedule your games, come up with different times to play. You just might not be on the same Zoom call as everybody else on Thursday nights, but that's totally fine if you do need to reschedule. Just keep us in the loop so that we're able to find your games after the fact.
Quite right, quite right.
Yes.
Uh,
However, if you do play it on Thursday at 6:30, either John or I will be streaming right here on Thursday night at 6:30, and we'll probably be putting in that nice little lichess.org link so that you can find our games on the Lichess homepage as well. Mr. Pickles, that's why this is not advertised on Lichess right now, because we don't have lichess.org in the title.
no.
So we should look forward to seeing all of these games on Thursday night. I think we'll have a whole bunch of games. I think we might have 24 or 25 paired this week. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what happens in the next couple of weeks. We should have some really good matchups. Speaking personally, I'm going to try really hard not to hang any pieces. I hope everybody else does the same. John, anything else that you want to add? Anything that I missed?
Well, I just want to make sure that anybody, can't say it enough, feels free to come by on Tuesday night when we will be doing sort of an overflow night. We prefer to call it, I guess, the Roundup Director's Cut, where we'll be taking a more close look at any games that we did not get to in full this evening. Obviously, we want to leave that space open for people whose games maybe didn't receive as much coverage tonight, but please do feel free to come out and join us on Tuesday nights as well. We are very much about getting everybody something to learn from their games and spending more time with the community. The other bit of news is that we are making a concerted effort, as perhaps you've noticed, to bring the Roundup in under time and be a little bit more efficient with our structuring of the show. However, this gives us a little bit more time and energy to hang out after the show and play some Blitz. So Andrew and I are going to take a quick break, probably 5 to 10 minutes. And then if anybody wants to hang around, we'll play some Blitz games with the chat. We'll learn a little bit more, and we'll call it a night in a couple hours.
Yes, definitely. And we are going to look forward to talking to everybody in a few minutes. Until then, I am Andrew Hoy here with our host, John Harden, and thank you for tuning in to another Acceptable Chess Roundup.